Welcome to the All-Star Planning Podcast. My name is Kelsey, and this is the place where I talk all things teacher lesson plans. Today, I am talking about writing fair tests. Writing fair tests is 100% art, and writing a fair test is going to be based in the quality of your lesson and unit plans and your alignment to your standards. I'm sure we have all been there, where we have taken a test and walked out and felt like it was a complete surprise. You were absolutely blindsided and you had no idea how difficult the test was going to be. Okay? We don't want to be the person writing that kind of test. Nobody wants to be the person taking that kind of test. But also those kinds of tests are going to not give a fair reflection of what kids are learning. So when you are writing a fair test, you are going to get the best picture at how kids are learning. Now, I don't think that tests are always the best way to figure out how well kids are learning. The podcast episode about that is not grading everything your kids do. I talk a lot about that there. But when you give a test, you want it to be a fair assessment of the kids' overall learning. Okay, so let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tips. 7 tips for writing fair tests, starting with number 1. Number 1 is that you don't want your tests to have any surprises at all whatsoever. Tests are not the time for surprises. I have been known to go through a test bank and find an excellent question and think, ooh, I would love for the kids to be able to get this question right. And I put it in the test. And then I go to make the answer key, because you should make the answer key before you give the test, just to make sure it all makes sense. And then I go, I didn't teach them everything they need to know to answer this question. And that stinks. But you can make that a bonus question. That is fantastic. It's I've done it a bunch of times. In fact, I just did it on the last test I gave. Because it's an extension question. If they can logically figure out how to get the answer just by, putting a few pieces together in their own brain, that's cool. If it's something entirely brand new from scratch, they're gonna need you to teach it. It's not very fair. But bonus is a good option for when you find a question that the kids aren't quite ready for. Now, in order to prevent surprises, your questions should very much be aligned to your learning targets, and your learning targets should be aligned to your test. So, any given lesson, you have a target of students will be able to blah, blah, blah. Or in my case, it's an I can statement, and it would say, I can, blah, blah, blah. Whatever that blah, blah, blah is, should be what the test question needs them to do in order to get it right. So, upcoming for me is, I can determine how to separate mixtures. So, the kids should be able to get a question that asks them specifically, how would you separate a mixture of salt and water? Ta-da! That learning target is geared towards that particular question. And because I code all of my lessons, that's lesson 7.4. So when I write the test, I will literally go through for every single question and say, question 5 pertains to lesson 7.4. And that's that. Your learning targets should mostly be a study guide for your kids. I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, and I can do this, check boxes, and then that's their study guide. That's everything they need to know for the test. Boom. There was a lesson about, a podcast episode about that as well, and it was doubling your curriculum calendar as a study guide. The second red flag of an unfair test is having too many challenging questions or too many easy questions. And the problem here is that you are not going to get a good picture of the kids' overall learning. If you have too many challenging questions, the test becomes near impossible, and only the best and the brightest kids are going to do well, and everybody else is going to do miserable. And if the test is too easy, then everyone's going to do great, and you're not going to really know who falls where, right? Everyone's going to do great. Your average level kid and your genius PhD student kid are going to get the same grade. And it's okay if they get the same grade if they both earn the same grade. You don't want to set it up that everybody's going to get the same grade if that's not really reflective of their overall learning. You know what I mean? So there are a few ways to avoid this, and I like to categorize my questions as easy, medium, or hard. And I also like to categorize them by the skill needed to answer the question. So if it is a rote memorization question, I only want a few of those on my test. If it is a definition question or a multi-step question, you got to be careful with those. If it's a data analysis question, I want a few things from each skill set. I don't want my entire test, unless it's supposed to be on data analysis or a whole test of rote memorization. It's not going to give you an overall good picture of what's being learned. So categorizing those questions and deciding that you want 5 of this and 8 of that and 3 of this, that's fine. I think you need a little bit of everything, a little bit of easy, a little bit of medium, and a little bit of hard. When you have a good variety of question type, you are going to get a better picture. If you have a test of mostly medium questions with a little bit of easy and a little bit of hard, then you can really see how kids fall on the spectrum of the grades, because the kids who have learned the most are going to get more of the questions right. And the kids who have learned the least are going to get the fewest questions right, and those would probably be the easy and the lower level medium questions, where the kids who have learned the most are going to get the most questions, including the high level mediums and the hard questions. Okay, so following that is having either too many or too few questions. I know, making a test is an art. I like to use the standardized test or the final exam as kind of a guide for where your questions need to fall in terms of time limit. So the reason for this is because you want your kids to kind of have like the speed, they call it test stamina, in order to answer standardized test questions or final exam questions or midterm questions with the same kind of speed that they do questions throughout the whole year. So my final exam is 180 minutes long and has 85 questions. If we just average it out, each question is 2.11 minutes. So I like to take my class period, which previously, it used to be 40 minutes. Let's just go with that. If it's 40 minutes and each question is supposed to be roughly 2 minutes, I put 20 questions on the test. Right? Sometimes that will go to 25, but never like 35, because 35 would be way too much. And when you have too many questions, the kids can't answer enough of them for you to be able to get a good picture. When there are too few questions, you are putting too much weight in one question, where if the kid gets one question wrong, it looks like they haven't learned as much as they have because the one question is weighted very heavily. You know what I'm saying? So if you only want to give like 5 to 10 questions, perhaps make it a quiz instead of a test, and adjust the worth so that one question isn't worth like 12 points, because that's a lot. That would mean one question you get wrong, now you're at an 88. That to me is too few questions. That's better for a quiz. The next thing would be that your point worth is too much or too little, which again has to go back to having too many or too few questions. In this, what you're really looking at is, are your questions weighted equally against each other? So are your easy questions worth fewer points? Are your harder questions worth more points? Are questions that take more time worth more points? Again, I think using your standardized test or your final exam is a very good option here, because you kind of want to give kids an expectation and also give yourself an expectation of how the kids are going to do on this end of the year test, whatever it is, based on scoring methods that you can use during the year. So if you don't have a standardized test, let's say you're teaching 9th grade math and there's no test at the end of 9th grade math, but there is a test at the end of 10th or 11th grade math, I would do my best to kind of model your test after a final that they could have. So like if you're in a pre-AP or an honors class in high school, maybe you want to model it after the AP test. Or what you remember from college if you're teaching like 11th and 12th grade kids, just so that you kind of are pushing them towards expectations that will arrive eventually. You know what I'm saying? So if in kindergarten the kids don't have a standardized test, maybe point it kind of sort of towards the standardized test they get in 2nd or 3rd grade. You know what I'm saying? So point worth goes into that quite a bit. Now, on my standardized test for my year 1 kids, every single question is weighted equally. So everything is just like a 1-part question. Anything that, like some people would say that this is question 2A, 2B, 2C, because they're all based on like the same paragraph or the same data set or whatever it is, those would be split into questions like 15, 16, and 17. So I do that same thing. I try to create a test, not necessarily that's modeled after the final, but so that when the kids get to the final, they're not scared. You know what I mean? I want all the expectations lined up. The next thing is having double Jeopardy. Going into that, you know, those questions that kind of all lead into each other. You don't want to have double Jeopardy questions, which means that if, for instance, they got question 15 wrong, by default, they're going to get question 16 wrong. Those aren't cool. Most standardized tests are designed so that double Jeopardy can't happen. So you don't want it to happen to you either. If you are teaching math or science and you kind of want to divide up the questions so that your point worth makes sense, you can plug into like an Excel sheet or a Google sheet the formula that the kids should use, maybe for question 15, and then they have to plug in the number for 16. You can set it into Google Sheets or Excel, plug in the formula, and then put in the number that the kids give you, and then the spreadsheet will give you the answer that they should have gotten. This way you don't have to solve the problem for every single kid who gives you an answer that is not matching the answer key. I do this with labs. I love it for labs because it'll tell me, like, say one group, their mass is 2.51 grams, and then another group has 2.68 grams for their sample. I want to make sure that the math follows through, so I'll just plug it in on a spreadsheet and it'll do all the math for me. Not that I'm too lazy to do the math, it's just that work smarter, not harder. So you can do that with your tests as well, so that you don't have to solve every single kid's problem, and then you can also avoid double Jeopardy. So like a good solution for that would be, as long as you plug in, as long as the number that you plug in, if you follow it through the formula properly, you'll get credit type of thing, then that will work just fine. It's just you don't want to get kids stuck in a trap where if they make one mistake, it's going to count against them a bunch of times. It's not really fair. The next thing, number 6, is creating indirect questions that are too open-ended. This one I messed up a lot, and it's probably my most common test mistake, is because I feel like many scientists have like a little bit of tunnel vision and I can't really think outside of my realm of possibility. I can, but I can't. So for me, it's like I'm thinking on one train of thought, and if another kid comes in on another train of thought that is like tangentially correct, I didn't think about it when I was making the test or the answer key. But when I get the kid's response, I go, ooh, that technically does answer the question. Ooh, that's technically correct. That mostly comes down to me and not asking the question correctly. So that's just something to be aware of when writing tests. Number 7, and the final thing, is having multiple correct answers. And this is really specific, in my opinion, to multiple choice questions. And this kind of drives me crazy, specifically with like college level tests and courses that end in college credit, is that you'll have a multiple choice question that has 4, sometimes 5 answer choices, and the directions say to choose the best answer. Are you trying to tell me that there is an opinion thrown into what the best answer is. Like, anybody can make an argument as to which answer is better than any other answer. Not cool. Not cool, especially for multiple choice questions, because multiple choice only offers you so many answer choices. It's not like open-ended where you can go back and kind of like back up your answer, provide evidence or analysis or something. For a multiple choice question, you choose something and that's it. There's no justification allowed on a multiple choice question. So just be very mindful when you are either writing questions or curating questions that the answers available only lead to one definitely correct answer, because choose the best answer is just not cool. So those are my tips for helping you to write a more fair test. Of course, even me, every single year, I find errors on tests and have to just throw out questions sometimes. I think the kids really like it and appreciate it when you just say like, hey, I'm not grading number 12, everyone's getting credit for it because it was a bad question, or I didn't teach it to you yet, or there were multiple correct answers, or the answers were all over the place. It was very apparent that I didn't teach this as well as I should, or I didn't ask this question as well as I should have. Kids appreciate the honesty. 1000% they do. So anytime that happens, just find a fair solution. You don't have to give them credit. You can just knock it out of the test, and then instead of it being a 25 question test, now it's a 24 question test. Whatever seems the most fair to you and to your students. Perhaps you just replace that one question in a 3-minute quiz, and they get one question and you just pick up that question and plug it into the test. I don't know. I usually just throw it out because I'm not interested in creating more work for myself. I just give every kid like 3 or 5 points or whatever it is. They appreciate it. So that's that. If you're interested in more about tests, I have a podcast episode about unlimited test retakes that I allow my kids to have. It's a little bit of an extreme policy, but for me and for my students, it works. If you're interested, there's an episode on that. You can also find my free masterclass at plan.kelseyruby.com. It's called the All-Star Planning Introductory Masterclass, and it is where I show you how the 5 pieces of the All-Star Planning method come together to help you build a very strong, reliable curriculum, and it makes writing tests very easy. Like I was saying, how I code my numbers, my lessons, and question 5 is related to lesson 7.4. All of that is like embedded in the planning method. So writing my tests is super quick and easy, even though I still sometimes make mistakes. I'm just not dwelling on these 7 tips very often because your girl has a method. Subscribe to the podcast. New episodes come out every Tuesday, and I will see you then. Bye for now.